This is a subchapter of Chapter 1 called The Checklist and How to Use It. So most of the chapters actually do have subchapters. The main chapter usually stands alone as the most important argument, and the subchapters are additional arguments that may be closely or just slightly related to the main chapters. So after finishing this chapter, I actually thought about how to implement these strategies into the classroom. And I thought the best way to do it is through a checklist. So what I did is I put together this checklist and I kind of randomly put out the questions about the aspects of a community first and work first class, and you can just fill it out. So next, I'm just going to talk about how to use the checklist in class, how to interpret the results, and how to plan for the future of your class to make it a more authentic Montessori class by making it more community first. So firstly, you want somebody who's a little bit more objective than the main guide or the assistant to do this observation. So once you have that person chosen, then have them print out the checklist and sit in the class. Now let's take this step by step. So first thing is to sit and observe passively for the entire morning work cycle. The checklist won't take the whole time, so you're free to observe other things during the time that you're sitting in the class. Then, after at least 30 minutes have passed during the work cycle, look through the questions and mark either true, unsure, or false on each of them. And make sure to take special care when answering the questions that are underlined and highlighted in gray. Those are the most important ones. It's very common for classes to show different attributes during different parts of the work cycle. Typically, it's more work first earlier in the work cycle and more community first later on around like false fatigue time. Make sure to revisit the questions near the end of the work cycle, or if you observe a sustained change in the class's state, and adjust the answers if you need to. Afterwards, you take the key, which is a part of the printout document, and you just give yourself a score. An example would be, let's say Class A had 18 A's and 5 B's. That would make it a very work-first class. Class B has 7 A's and 14 B's. That would mean it's quite a community first class. Not totally, but quite a community first class. And let's say Class C has 11A and 10B. That would mean that the class kind of equally prioritizes work and community building. So of course that begs the question, what score is good? And the answer is not a simple as many B's as possible, which represent community first attributes. It actually depends on what your class needs. Typically, classes at the very beginning of the year would benefit from being more work first. This is because the start of the year, the children need to practice their work cycle until it's a matter of routine. They may not be able to choose their work very well independently, nor have the social skills or friendships strong enough to be peaceful when they're not working. However, as soon as the children have developed a rudimentary work cycle and know the basic ground rules of the class, then the adults should make an effort to gradually ease off on the children and aim for a score like Class B, where it's quite community first. Eventually, the goal should be to reach a score of 0A, like 0 work first qualities, and 25B, all community first. But this is not something that an unprepared class can handle. The prepared environment must be very well set up. The children must have very strong ground rules and great work cycle. And they must have excellent grace and courtesy skills as well. They must be very independent, helping each other whenever the adults are not around, caring for the environment without being asked. Remember though that although that's the end goal, to have a fully community first class, having one that is quite community first can happen quite quickly after just a few weeks at the start of the class. So although the journey to a perfect score will be long, the class will begin to function like a true children's house, a community first class, quite quickly. Now, this is of course the ideal situation starting from the beginning of the year. There are two different situations, though, that can change the plan very significantly. First is a class that has been running for several months in a firmly work-first state. If that's the case, then you're going to have to really take your time and introduce the community-first traits one at a time. Children cannot just go from a class where they're never allowed to talk until outdoor time to one that they can chat whenever they want during the work period instantly. Add on to that children that always get help from the adults suddenly expected to help each other when they never did before. These types of large routine changes should be introduced one by one during group time and through grace and courtesy lessons if they are to benefit the class rather than creating confusion and chaos. Oddly, it'll likely be the adults who suffer most from these changes because their sense of control over the class will be reduced or even removed and put into the hands of young children. So gradual adaptation will be the best for all. The second special situation is that you have a class that has been changed to a community first class before it is ready. Some common signs of that are: 1, concentration is very rare. 2, the adults do not seem to be obeyed by the children very well. 3, the class is very loud and full of children distracting one another constantly. 4, the ground rules are not followed by the children. 5, the children have poor manners and are kind of rude. 6, the average number of working children in the class is under 40%. And number 7, the children are much more interested in chatting with their friends or playing than working. Much, much more interested. Let me make this clear that a class with these traits, even a lot of them, doesn't need to change to fully work first, but rather it's just not ready to be as community first as it currently is. So prioritizing work would benefit the class that's showing quite a few of these traits, even just a couple. I just want to note that a class that scores relatively equal on work and community doesn't actually need any special strategies when changing it to a more community-first class. A one-to-one class, as I call it, tends to have a more natural feel that's actually closer to a community-first class than a work-first class from my observations. Nothing too special needs to happen when you're changing it to become more community-first because it's already kind of on the way there. Maybe I might be coming off as overly confident on this whole concept of work first and community first, and maybe you're on the fence, so let me just add something, because I'm talking right now after I wrote this chapter months and months ago. I recently did some observations again, and I realized that work first classes have an incredibly low level of independence compared to community first classes. The children are not given the chance to take the time to make meaningful work choices, but they're rushed into these choices, and quite often their teachers are choosing for them, and they're not given the freedom to socialize in a natural way, but they're just not allowed to talk to each other most of the time, and as a result they don't develop social skills. They only develop work skills, and these children are just not able to be independent or to be trusted. There's no collaboration between the children, and that makes the adults always needed. These children are just not as independent as children in more community-first classes. I know that very few people are going to be able to know the difference of what it's like sitting for hours in a community-first class versus a work-first class, but trust me, work-first classes are not pleasant to be in. And they're not what Montessori was talking about in her books, as we can see looking at one of her many quotes on freedom. After a time, the teacher understands that if there is a lack of discipline, she must be making a mistake. The children are not having sufficient freedom. If we give perfect freedom, we get perfect discipline. While the work first and community first aspects of classes are extremely important, they are a very small part of what makes a Montessori class authentic and well-functioning. That is why I wrote over 60 chapters about it in this book that I'm now making into a video series. So in the next chapter, I'm going to talk about the unsettled class and how to deal with children that are not ready to have full freedom over what they do in the class.